today?
I'm all right, yeah. It
came
was
in from London?
easy enough journey from London. Paddington to Oxford, very good, well travelled.
That's very good. At what point do you think they're going to, if we say something, no, at what point
We were
will
having
they
a great
figure it out?
conversation, deeply engaged.
It's going to get really salacious, and then they're going to quiet down. I'll drop a couple F-bombs. Right? It's my middle name.
Are you allowed to do that at Oxford?
In Oxford, no, but in the newsroom, people consider me to be the person with Tourette syndrome.
Do you want, are we sitting?
I don't know, we're sitting, we're going to, actually, it's not our show, it's their show. So everything about this session is going to be what they want to do. So here's what we're going to do first. I'm going to poll you and find out, or maybe canvass you, what we should talk about. And then finally, before we have our conversation, I'm going to ask, do we stand or we sit? So first, how's it going? Great. No. That's too binary. It's like good or bad. No, this is data. I need to see the deciles. We're going to leave the far end of the tail somewhere else. Who here thinks it's going to be 7 to 10? Who here says it's a 7? Raise your hand. Loser. Okay, who here says it's an 8? 9, 10. All right, that's what I want to see. So it's a nice little, it's curved off to the end. I see there's some undecideds. I don't know what to do with you. What should we talk about? What are the themes that I should bring up as the moderator stroke interviewer to Euan Blair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, why don't we talk about the Lib Dems as well? Whatever. Okay. No, it's a really good thing. National ID. What else? Let's generalize what to do about kids. Okay. Kids. Please. Say that again. Threat to formal learning posed by AI. AI learning. Okay. That's it. You guys are so passive. Disruption that James was talking about earlier. Although he was pretty sunny, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Well, funny, maybe there's a business.
That's something I want to talk about. Yeah, that's great.
Maybe there's a business that could help skill people. Who knows? Please. Smartphone-free childhood. Not sure that's your forte, but we can bring that up. Smartphone-free childhood. I mean, I did, after all, invite you to offer questions. What else? Apprenticeship cuts from the government. Okay. Don't know if we want to make it too politicized, but we'll talk about apprenticeships and policy. Apprenticeship and policy. Please. Critical thinking. Perfect. Good. Upskill and change. Someone just said that's a good one, so maybe we're going to start with that. Final question. You'll have another chance to ask questions after we talk, but the final one is, do we stand or we sit? All in favor of standing, say stand. Sit.
No, sit.
Come on, we can relax in these comfy chairs, which are much more comfortable than ones like this.
Come on, you. Okay, no, stand or sit. Stand. Sit.
Sit.
What do you want to do?
I'll sit.
Okay, but don't worry.
Because this feels, I sort of, having no idea of what I've just let myself in for, given Ken has literally crowdsourced questions on nearly any topic. Me being in a relaxed armchair will probably make for a sort of, I'm more likely to be off guard, you know?
Exactly, you're lulled into a sense of comfort because I want to assure you all, he is not going to be comfortable. Just because we're sitting doesn't mean this is going to be a friendly interview. It's going to be as hostile and red-meated as possible. Okay, punk. All right.
It's great to be here.
Exactly. Let's go right into upskilling and change.
Sure.
How can you meaningfully upskill? Well, actually, no, let's not start there. Let's start with multiverse, and then let's go into how do we actually do this in an environment which change is happening so quickly. So multiverse, go for it.
Yeah. So we are basically upskilling the workforce at scale in AI, tech, and data skills, because it's our belief and my belief that we need to make sure we train and reskill as many people as possible in face of this giant technological change. Otherwise, we risk massive dislocation in the labor market, people being left behind, and this challenge that will have been touched on today already of AI possibilities not actually becoming AI realities. And we do this in really three key ways. So we go to organizations and we diagnose the gaps between their goals and the capabilities of their people. We then prescribe learning pathways against those goals to make sure that we can basically address that capability gap. And then we deliver the treatment with a mix of humans, AI, and our platform, and then basically measure all of this back in terms of the three things that nearly every organization cares about: cost avoidance, cost reduction, and revenue generation. So it's really kind of taking skills and turning it into tangible workplace outcomes. We do it with 1,500 organizations and a real range from 100 NHS trusts, 70 local authorities, 30 higher education institutions, including Cambridge, but not yet Oxford. That one is on the list. And everyone from Barclays and John Lewis Partners to Jaguar Land Rover and GXO Logistics. And the interesting thing in terms of the kind of people we train in tech, data, and AI is it's largely for non-technologists. So we train doctors and nurses, operations managers, warehouse workers, store managers, retail assistants. Basically addressing this kind of technology inflection point is going to be an everyone challenge.
When did you start the company?
Back in 2016, started delivering in 2017.
What were you seeing back then that made you start the company?
I think it was this gap between kind of what employers actually needed from their workforces and the people they were hiring, and what they were getting out of both the academic system, but also a general environment where employer spending on skills has lagged technological change, right? We've had a 20-year relentless march of software tooling designed to address nearly everything in the workplace, and yet productivity growth has basically stagnated. And so I think the reason that's happened is so much of the focus and the investment has gone into the power of the kind of platform or the tool, and not nearly enough has gone into how do you take people on the journey and adoption and usage. Right, and that's kind of that gap made it feel like an obvious path to build a business in.
Okay, you went from Bristol to Yale to Morgan Stanley. What was it that made you see that there was an opportunity to do that?
I think partly my own experiences. So I studied ancient history, famously one of the most useful degrees to be accredited in if you want a sort of successful job. And then I went into investment banking, right, having studied international relations at Yale, and realized I learned everything on the job. My job was basically an apprenticeship, right? I was taught how to structure derivatives, how to analyze credit risks, how to do lots of other things that you need to do working in a corporate debt and derivatives team, but were all completely new to me. And this kind of degree credential was a sort of badge that you're probably reasonably smart and some sort of critical thinker. But it struck me as odd that all of these skills employers needed you to have were basically being neglected by the education system. And then as I actually left Morgan Stanley to join an organization that was a welfare to work organization. So it was helping people who were long-term unemployed find jobs and often re-engage with the labor market. And it became clear to me the biggest barrier to people getting jobs, but also staying in their jobs, was keeping up with the pace of change and this skills bit. And it just felt like, well, look, if the formal education system's not going to address this, and employers care about it, but haven't really prioritized it, how do you build a vehicle for getting them to invest seriously in skilling people on the job? Because the other thing about our kind of academic system is all of the focus is on accumulation of knowledge, and very little is on the accumulation of skills. And we spend a lot of time preparing people for what comes when they turn 16 and GCSEs, 18 and A-levels, university, and not what's that going to mean when I get into the workplace and I need to deliver on a project my managers assigned me to.
The year 2016 is ancient history compared to where we are today with AI.
Yeah.
So how has Multiverse needed to change to address the needs of today?
So any company that wants to kind of scale very rapidly and meet the market has to basically change and adapt as the world changes and adapts around it. And we started really building more or less an alternative to university for organizations, focused on where they could acquire early talent, helping them acquire that early talent and then training them on the job. it became clear as we began to work with companies that not only was it not tremendously strategic or valuable to them simply finding them early talent and training them, but 98% of the workforce in any given year is incumbent. You're better off actually focusing more on the 98% of people already in the workforce than the 2% of people who might enter it. And it changed our business. Initially, we were selling to HR directors, learning and development directors, and apprentice managers. As we started to get into training the workforce for the kind of post-industrial age, we began speaking to chief information officers, chief operating officers, chief financial officers, because the discussion became, actually, how do we use skills as an engine of productivity? And that was just a much more kind of interesting area for us to dive into. And then with the kind of post-ChatGPT sort of focus on AI, it was so obvious that AI is both the biggest threat and the biggest opportunity for the workforce. The question for us is, how do we pivot our business to make it about minimizing that threat and maximizing the opportunity? And more conversations I was having with business leaders would say, we know AI is really important. We know it's really valuable. We have no idea where to start. And candidly, it often feels like a solution looking for a problem in a workplace context. So we basically said, let's up-level our mission, equip the workforce to win in the AI era, and try and really target the mass adoption of AI amongst the workforce. So that was kind of the journey, right? Responding to what was happening in the world.
Okay, so now we're at a situation where you've had to pivot and focus on bolstering the skills of the workforce for the AI era to prevent AI from being a hammer looking for a nail.
And mass job displacement, because those two things are sort of very closely linked. Because if you can show how an individual, who it's all too easy for an employer to see an individual head as a cost center, if you can show them how instead they're an engine of revenue growth, this is growing the size of the pie, right? Not cutting off the crusts, show them how they're actually a sort of unit of value, then it changes the calculation employers make.
Okay, so when I hear that, it warms my heart. But sadly, as a journalist, I don't have a heart. Whenever my heart gets warmed, I get a little bit suspicious. And I think, is that really the case? So let's look at this a little bit more closely. With James, we talked about how the jobs will change because of AI. Some jobs will go away, some jobs will be enhanced, new jobs will be created.
Yep.
James is flying at a high altitude. He works for Google, worked at McKinsey. You're in the trenches because you're actually with young people and older people who are in the labor force. What are you seeing?
Yeah. So,
and can I also I'll add to that, do not flinch from job disruption. Explain where things are being obliterated and what people can do about it.
So there's a couple of, actually on the job disruption front, we have to be really careful because at the moment, people are already making assumptions, right? You know, you're seeing kind of fewer graduate scheme opportunities and other things and associating that with AI rather than the fact that we are in a macroeconomic down cycle at the moment, right? Inflation's still high, interest rates are higher than they were, businesses aren't investing at the rate they were. Whether, you know, to what extent AI is responsible versus just we're in a different economic place than we were a few years ago is not clear. AI will absolutely disrupt jobs, but in any given week, you have two reports coming out saying completely contradictory things, right? One says AI will be the biggest job creator, as we've seen in every kind of inflection point ever. And then you have Dario at Anthropic saying 25% of white-collar workers will lose their jobs in 5 years. You know, you have Ken Griffin at Citadel saying it's going to be 20 to 30 years before AI actually is of any use to anyone. And, you know, I'm not sure I believe the hype. Like, it is incredibly hard to prognosticate anything accurate. So I'll talk about what we're seeing, but just say I'm still wary of drawing sweeping trends off the back of our data. We are now the largest provider of apprenticeships in the UK, possibly the largest in the world actually at the moment. So we do have some sort of insight. In and amongst the workforce, there is absolutely fear around AI, but actually the excitement outweighs the fear. The challenge people have is in most organizations, and particularly big clunky enterprise companies and public sector organizations, it's not clear to them where and when and how they can engage with AI. And a lot of organizations are still having their AI strategies run by their legal team, their compliance team, their IT team. It is seen as a kind of risk rather than an opportunity simply because of the way they kind of make a lot of their decisions and the things that could go wrong. And what we're trying to do to unlock that is top down is all well and good, but CEOs can say we want everyone in our workforce to become AI enabled. It doesn't happen unless you actually train them in use cases specific to their job. So the beauty about an apprenticeship in this area is, what is an apprenticeship? In essence, it's a series of projects and use cases that demonstrate a competency to do your job. Now, we have attached that to use cases and projects built using AI, data, and technical skills. And so we're effectively building kind of banks and libraries of things people do to make their jobs better and faster with AI. The average age of our apprentices at the moment is 42, by the way. So we are training a lot of people who are worried they will lose their job if they can't change, and have often been historically technology resistant. But we are finding, people in the NHS, as an example, one of their biggest challenges is around capacity and bed occupancy. They have really creaking poor data collection practices and systems, right? There's a lot of stuff still done on pen and paper. They have Excel spreadsheets, hundreds of thousands on everything that often aren't kept updated. By automating their data collection practices and building live dashboards, we've been able to help people spot beds that are listed as occupied that aren't actually occupied, freeing up capacity. We allowed an acute care ward double the number of patients in a day to be seen in a London hospital. There are just lots of opportunities for basically people working in frontline clerical operational jobs to use technology and data to automate.
How were you able to get those productivity gains? What actually happened?
You're sort of deconstructing the way people work, mapping it out, and then saying, right, where are things that can be automated? Where can we speed up data collection? Where can we help you speak to someone else? Often in an organization, we'll work with a spread of people in different teams and functions. Anyone running a business, particularly of any scale, will know one of the biggest challenges you face is kind of functional silos, right? People are delivering often very similar things and not talking to each other. Bringing them together for hackathons, structured pieces of work, challenges, allows them to start sharing that much more broadly. And so it's a combination of our human coaches working with people on sort of deconstructing and reconstructing how they work. Again, often it's less a technology problem and more a kind of organizational problem.
It's like creating a strategy unit. Where would that idea have come from? Never mind. Just a thought. So can you give another example of how apprenticeships are working and how we can learn from that example that you give us to think more broadly about how we can upskill labor for the new world of work?
Well, and I contrast some of it, and I'm conscious I'm sitting in an academic environment, right? But there are a lot of non-academics in the room. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the academic pursuit, but making it practical, making it real, showing people live examples of things they can do differently using technology. Like, that really is the thing. An apprenticeship works because you are training someone in their job, right? You have coaches, line managers, leaders aligned. You know the goals of the organization. You can basically help people ladder up what they're learning towards those goals. And it just creates a very effective loop. Now, it's not the only way of doing that, but when it comes to kind of workforce training, EdTech as an example, as a field, right? In fact, investors have probably lost more money in EdTech than any field bar maybe crypto and Web3, right? It's not been hugely successful in terms of a lot of startups and scale-ups in that space. The first generation of EdTechs, your Coursera's, Udemy's, Udacity's, really focused on let's help people learn what they want to learn, paid for by their employer as a sort of employee benefit, right? Nothing wrong with that. The challenge is employers weren't directly benefiting from those skills people were learning. Retention wasn't particularly high because often people couldn't see how they could apply it to their job. And so you had this mismatch between employer expectations on the one hand and individual expectations on the other. What we've tried to do, looking at it through a B2B lens, is say, how do you actually make learning a subset of fulfilling the company's goals, embed it in an organization? You're giving someone a formal credential that's beneficial for them and teaching them a new skill, but at the same time, the employer knows it's a new skill that is furthering their strategy. So trying to bring those two things together has been kind of one of my obsessions as we built Multiverse.
Do you perceive yourself to be in the ed tech market?
No, at this point, much more workforce transformation. right? And I think that is, if you look at AI as an example, you've had so much time, energy, attention, and hundreds of billions pour into the foundational model there. You then have an entire plethora of companies in nearly every sector where we're already seeing vertical winners emerge, exist at the AI application level. These are the things that are being sold to companies at scale right now. The missing part for me feels like it is the AI adoption layer, which is basically how do you turn this kind of great promise into actual value that is going to be GDP additive, right? And so we're seeing a lot of success there. It's one of my favorite stats from last year was Accenture made more revenue from AI in 2023-24 than OpenAI did, right? And this is something that shows that there is a massive gap. And I'm not sure the best people to fix those problems are necessarily the management consultants.
Now, yesterday in Manhattan, Chris Anderson, the head of TED, announced that he was starting the process of passing the reins to lead TED to a new generation of leaders, one of them being Sal Khan of the Khan Academy, which is ed tech in a way. It's a philanthropy, but it's the world's largest educational institution.
Indeed.
Tens of millions of students every evening are doing their homework assignments and learning through that platform. How do you see the market for continual education or continual learning evolving in the future? TED is clearly moving in that direction. The Economist tomorrow will have, or this evening if you have the app, will have an article called TEDucation, which is about that shift. How do you see that playing out?
I think it's sort of, and I just want to make sure I know what you mean here. Do you mean, how do you see it playing out in terms of the intersection of technology and education changing what's taught in schools? Or do you mean more the kind of path forward for education?
I'm also the path forward for education, but also in the world of ideas, there is a new player who is going to be taking both youngsters and adults and training them by themselves, by their volition, with their clicks, for the workforce for tomorrow. In some ways, this is accretive. It's not a competitor to you, but it's clearly complementary to what you're doing.
So look, I think it's great, right? I think you need more content, but I am wary of kind of generating content and lesson plans as kind of being the solution overall. I think you need a real mix, right? You need content that is accessible broadly. One of the big advantages of AI and AI generated content is you can turn scarcity into abundance, right? You can make sure people get more access to education materials with AI agents and tutors. You can, give someone a personal tutor in their pocket. That breaks the 2 Sigma model that sort of suggests that people learn better when they get 2 standard deviations better when they get sort of personal tutelage versus being in a classroom. But the multiverse role in it, and my big focus is sort of, that's all well and good, but practical on-the-job skills have just been underinvested in for so long and often overlooked and sometimes even sneered at, right? Employer investment in this area has not been great. And the education conversation is too often dominated by a sort of more esoteric version of education that is valuable, but shouldn't be the whole thing. So just more focus on applied education, I think, is great. And part of the value from that, look, in 10 years' time, I'm not sure how you're going to be able to have a system of examinations and courses people are learning in schools done the way they are today. Because AI will mean that not only will cheating just kind of be ubiquitous, but it's just not going to work, the traditional classroom model. So that hopefully will inspire educators and educational institutions to pivot more to this idea of, okay, we know you're going to be able to have access to lots of knowledge at your fingertips. So we're going to focus on you interrogating that knowledge, generating insights, and then turning those insights into practical things you can do in the world. So it's great, right? I think it's really important, and it solves a lot of the challenge that's plagued scholastic education. But I think this applied education area needs investment.
Okay, so you've got the praxis, you've got the techne, but one of the questions was about critical thinking.
Yeah.
With all of the focus on the practical learning, not what you know, but what you do, how can we address the question about bringing critical thinking into the workforce of tomorrow?
So I would argue critical thinking is inherent in that, because you're not you're not just creating a load of hammers, right? Because every problem is a nail. This is the kind of thing. If you are going to be able to demonstrate that the project you are working on is having a meaningful impact for your employer, and those three things, cost avoidance, cost reduction, revenue generation, then you're going to have had to have been pretty thoughtful about the area you're addressing and what you're tackling. We do also spend time with people on things like, we have financial literacy models. We have modules around things like how to have challenging conversations in the workplace. One of the reasons people love our human coaching model, and however far we go with AI, and we've embedded it across the organization, we will always need human coaches because their ability to hold someone accountable and challenge them and prompt on some of those critical thinking points is really, really useful and in fact, really vital to us. But I think you've got to start from a premise of critical thinking is not simply taking a subject and writing something smart on it. It's also figuring out, actually, how do I solve this problem that my colleagues are experiencing, that I'm experiencing?
Human coaches are essential.
Yeah.
And the idea of leadership and personal leadership. How did you learn leadership?
How
did you learn leadership? Where did that come from? Was it sort of in your blood?
Yeah, I can see where this question's heading. Look, so
I told you I was going to troll you.
Yeah, you did. No,
Exactly.
by the way,
No
and I may as
false
well
advertising.
say the obvious thing. I learned a lot from my dad, right? I got to observe him close up. You grow up and your dad's the prime minister and he's sort of showing leadership on a global scale. You don't turn away from that. And I'm incredibly proud of him and what he did. But also, it gave me a lot of things, right? An incredible perspective and everything else. I have found the best way of learning leadership is by doing, right? By actually managing people, spending time with them, getting things wrong, making mistakes, looking like an idiot, and then fixing it. I've tried to digest them into kind of operating principles. For example, I think one of the most important tenets around leadership and something we practice in Multiverse is be decisive even in ambiguity, right? First, nearly every decision is a two-way door decision, meaning it can be reversed if you get it wrong. But second, there is no such thing as a perfect decision or perfect information. So you need enough to feel that you can be decisive about something, but not so much. I say to our employees all the time, I would rather you be decisively wrong and we can fix it than spend 6 months trying to be right, but we've missed an opportunity.
Do you think that works? This is going to sound awful, but I'm going to go for it. Do you think that works in Britain? Like, so let me explain what I mean by that. You're a British company, and the British culture is to be far more reserved and cautious than the American gung-ho, take that hill, come what may approach. Now, you might say that there's a wisdom to Britain and there's a foolhardiness to the American culture, but maybe there's something, but you tell me, how do you see the corporate culture changing, and how do you get your staff to be as decisive as you want them to be?
This is a real and genuine problem, and people have talked about it a lot, but I can share some of my own experience on it. So we're pretty unique in being a business where nearly all of our revenues and employees are coming from the UK and Europe. And yet we have raised every single dollar of the $450 million we've raised from the US, right? Pretty much. And honestly, the reason is because the VCs I met out there had bigger ambitions. I would have conversations with investors here in the UK and in Europe who would say, love this business. I want you to talk me through how you're going to make sure I get 3 times my money back in the next 3 to 5 years. I went and met Mary Meeker in California. And the first thing she says to me is, Euan, how do you make this a $500 billion business? Right? Now, I'm not sure I had a great answer for that, right? I gave her enough to get her interested and excited, but that level of thinking is just so wildly different and divergent. And so we definitely need some of that here, right? How many generational decacorn companies have been built in the UK recently? If you look at the top largest 25 companies in the world by market cap, not a single one is in Europe. That is a massive problem, and it's one that is going to, in the end, lead Europe into a kind of state of structural decline if we can't fix and address it.
If you could focus as a business leader in an entrepreneur in a fast-paced, innovative industry, if you could change one thing about Britain's or Europe's policy and startup ecosystem, what would it be?
Probably EMI options. Actually, that would be one big thing, particularly thinking through employees, which apparently and fortunately the government are looking at quite seriously. The thing that the Americans got right from the very start, and employee ownership is so much higher at American startups and scale-ups than it is over here, is if you want people to swing for the fences, give them a chance to make a life-changing sum of money, right, when they take a risk. And it's how you get people out of big tech, big corporates, safe, secure private sector jobs, and into high-risk startups that might fail because they think if this goes right, I could be a multimillionaire. And that's brilliant, right? That is a good impulse to have.
Can I add one other thing?
Yeah,
there's an interesting dimension to it, because if you think back, like the idea of being a multi-millionaire, what would you do if you had $1 million? Like, you have this idea of this like overweight, this plump guy sipping a margarita with like this parasol on a beach in Miami. It doesn't work. They're going to earn $1 million. They're going to be an investor, an angel investor in other companies, and they're going to do a second company, a third company, a fourth company. It's a totally different world.
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea that, and I'm seeing this more and more from the people we're meeting at our companies, so I'm quite hopeful, and obviously we're mainly made up of Brits, though we have hired a number of Americans, especially at leadership level, in large part because they've not just seen a version of the movie before, they've seen an Oscar-winning version of the movie, and they've got some kind of tremendous success. And they're more, that pattern recognition is really valuable. But I do think the idea that you sort of make a bit of money and then retire, like this is, you see great leaders, founders, others, either founding multiple companies or doing something and taking it all the way. It's not sort of, right, I've made a life-changing sum of money, that's enough. But to bridge the gap, this idea of getting Brits deeply comfortable with the fact that you can take an early stage bet, know it might fail, but no one's going to kind of throw scorn at you if it does fail, and actually, if it succeeds.
Well, they take
it's
they take their dosh and they invest in 6 other companies and give young 20-year-olds a chance.
Right.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So it's a flywheel. We don't have a lot of time, but we do have some time for more questions. I don't think we're going to have time to get to national IDs, nor smartphone and youth, but I'm interested in all of the questions.
Can I actually just say on that, just be really clear, we are not building national or digital ID. And I meant, despite what you might have heard of I got news.
Yeah, but however, I should say, like, totally essential question, and if it's not part of the Gen AI conversation, it ought to be. So we've got to find a forum with which that's front and center. Anyway, but
talk to my dad about it. He's got ideas, I hear. So
totally. Actually, I was asking about, when I was going to leadership, I was thinking of more Alexander the Great. I was not, which you are clearly the world's foremost scholar of, having read a book.
I have indeed read a book
on Alexander the Great. There's some questions. We're going to take a couple. Okay, thanks. We're going to take a whole bunch, and then we're going to sort of winnow it down to the ones that you answer. Go for it.
So I'm in the middle of doing an AI kind of enablement cultural shift at my company. And training is something that we've talked about, but how do you get your CEO to understand the ROI that training will give you? Because yes, I agree with you. There's the 3 functions of revenue, retain, OpEx. But how do you show that ROI to one of those and give them, the trust that we can spend the money?
Can I just ask, what area do you work in?
Trustpilot.
And what role?
Digital business partnering.
Amazing.
Okay, excellent. Other questions? I just want to hear from you, so we get into the comments and then we go back. Go, please.
The city of John Henry Newman, who wrote the book on universities. How do you see universities having to evolve? You're very much so driven in terms of skills and an applied way of learning, but universities offer so much more besides. And where is this going to eventually bring us, do you see?
Great. From the gallery, anything? No, very quiet. Rotten tomatoes thrown at us. Anything else? Yes.
Just a quick question. How do you keep the curriculum up to date and evergreen when the tech is changing so fast?
Love that question.
Great. Very similar to the first one on upskilling while everything's changing. So we have curriculum changing, universities evolving, train the CEO.
Yeah. Okay. So on the CEO point, by the way, our Chief Operating Officer, Claire Davenport, sits on the board of Trustpilot. So she can definitely exercise some leverage there. But in all seriousness, this is a thing we spend a lot of time in. If it is approached as a kind of learning internal skilling initiatives, CEOs rarely get interested in it. So we basically start with, what are the biggest things you want to drive as a CEO? I'll give you an example. Adolfo Hernandez, CEO of Capita, we've worked with really closely. I'm trying to execute a major transformation for quite an old legacy company. I want us to be much more AI native and digitally aware. And here is what this means financially for the organization. That allows us to say, well, we're going to design a training plan with you that will make sure you hit those goals, right? And it is building both the strategy and the plan in collaboration with the CEO. CEOs did not want to talk to us about general skilling, but how they're going to win in the AI era, they will talk to us about. And I'd welcome the conversation. So we should do that. On the university piece, I suspect and somewhat hope we will have fewer universities that are really incredible academic institutions and they focus on that without being, I do think universities could do with being less blind to the world outside, right? It should not just be about learning attainment and completion rates. It should be about future earnings and kind of what job you can go into. And the best universities are starting to do a lot more on that, but I do think they could benefit with being more outward looking. We probably have too many universities, right, that aren't necessarily bastions of academic excellence, but have been delivering it because it's what's always been delivered. If we have a shift and you have more kind of applied focused universities with a bent on work and the academic ones, I think it's a much better model, right? A mixed model of kind of higher education and further education. And then on the curriculum point, so there are two big things there. First, the beauty of the apprenticeship being this series of use cases and projects I talked about is as the technology changes, we're tool agnostic, right? You can introduce the latest version of ChatGPT or Claude. You can introduce Harvey Legal or whatever the kind of latest AI tool might be, or Microsoft Copilot's new release, or Salesforce Einstein, and train people in that on the job without needing a host of new materials, because actually these companies are pumping out materials. The challenge isn't the content. The challenge is actually what you do with that content and sort of learning how to introduce it into your flow of work. The other thing is, and look, in Britain, we are in danger of falling behind the curve. We don't need to stay ahead of the bleeding edge of AI. We just need to stay ahead of where the UK economy is, right? Now, I'm not sort of overly relaxed about that, but at the moment, when you look at most organizations, they're still trying to cope with the last digital transformation revolution, never mind the next one. If we can help them skip a step, that's brilliant, but that's yeah.
That's great. Euan Blair of Multiverse, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.